All right. This is indeed our last session of the series on the core of the teachings. And is, of course, we're dealing with the last paragraph of the 5 that constitutes that statement of Krishnamurti summarizing his teachings. We've been through quite a few things together in this, some difficult topics. And he ends with this last paragraph, which is just 2 sentences. As it is the last paragraph, would seem to be kind of the summation of what he had to say, or maybe even the essence of his approach, but is not, it doesn't sound on the face of it very positive, because he's affirming the significance of negation. So I'll read it, and we'll see whether we can figure something out about that. Total negation is the essence of the positive. When there is negation of all those things that thought has brought about psychologically, only then is there love, which is compassion and intelligence. To say that total negation is the essence of the positive would sound rather paradoxical. Usually, the negative is the opposite of the positive, and we all want to be positive. This is the way our culture works between these 2 poles. What is positive? To be kind, to have good thoughts, to aim at doing good, all those kinds of things. What is negative? Things like depression, like aggression, negative emotions we talk about a lot. So those obviously are harmful, right? So we seem to have these polarities that we work with and that have become part and parcel of our general culture. There are some, positive thinking, affirmation of yourself, always have this sense of optimism about what you can do. Where there is a will, there is a way. So we have all those positive aspects that we have cultivated. And in some cultures, it's almost a sine qua non. There is no way to think of yourself in the world except in such a positive projection, the achievement of something that is considered to be good. So Krishnamurti is bringing something else into the picture, right? When he says that total negation is the essence of the positive. Total negation of what? So he says, negation of all those things that thought has brought about psychologically. What has thought brought about psychologically? We'll look into that. And why is it important to negate that? Because it would seem from what we looked at already, and we'll go back to it just to give, because it has to do with the rest of the teachings that he's already been describing, that what we consider positive is what thought has put together, but what thought has put together turns out to be destructive and negative. So the negation of that negativity of thought, of the fact that the things that thought has put together psychologically are actually destructive, is therefore fundamental. And for him, of course, thought destroys love, builds up the self, is the denial of love. So he basically is saying, logically, I think, that if we deny what love is not, we deny thought and all that thought has put together, the self primarily, that's the summation of everything thought has put together psychologically, then love will come into being, intelligence and compassion. We don't know that necessarily, but this is his basic approach. We have to understand how it works with him and what is meant by negation, because it's not by negation, it's not just meant a verbal negation, but something that actually, how you say, dissolves through perception of what is false. The false itself falls away, right? So it's a bit trickier. It's not the usual dialectic of consciousness Hegelian dialectic, where a thought is posited, put forward, capitalism is the way to go, or no, communism is the way to go, those positions end up in contraries. They run into problems. If you carry capitalism to an extreme, then it ends up in injustice. It undermines democracy itself. It creates inequality, it denies freedom, leads to exploitation, violence, and the rest. So capitalism cannot continue in the pure form. Communism cannot either in the way it has developed. It says, well, the solution to the problems of capitalism is communism. So it comes as an antithesis to the position of capitalism. So I say, no, we deny private property, it's going to be the state, but ended up in tyranny. So it denies the freedom, it denies anything that has to do with the dignity of man even. You're brainwashed, you cannot think anything you want, you can't move. So that also enters into an opposite. So both are being denied. So the thesis, capitalism, and the antithesis, communism, end up in a struggle. Something new has to come into being. What comes into being? Socialism. Socialism, which is the welfare state of Europe. You see, the European states are basically socialist. In outlook, whatever government goes there, right wing or left wing, the welfare state is an outcome of an attempted synthesis between communism and capitalism, right? So there we have it, but it's now holding for a while, but you can expect that as it moves on, it might come to some kind of contradiction again, and it will need another movement. So within the sphere of thought, as we have had it, this seems to be the pattern. Krishnamurti is not talking about that. He still thinks that that's part of the movement within the field of thought. Thought moves by denial because his own contradiction brings about its opposite, right? But he says it's not a movement of the opposites. Now we're talking about something entirely different. He's saying, right? We'll look at it and see if we can clarify some matters because we have it in our culture that this is the way of progress. Good old Hegelian dialectics, that humanity, our Western world anyway, an analysis of humanity has led us to think this way, at least as far as we've gotten it, right? These are dialectical processes of thought in terms of what it posits to be meaningful, and then it running into a limit, into an opposite, a synthesis, and moving on. That process may have no end. But Krishnamurti is trying to bring something to an end, which is this endless battle, precisely, between the positings of thought and their denial and the conflict of the opposites that they generate. So it's going even beyond Hegelian dialectics. I was kind of surprised to discover that in Krishnamurti, that kind of philosophical implication. But we'll go slowly. I'm not going to take it to a philosophical, intellectual level if I can help it. What the thing I thought that we might look at is that we all are aware when we come in contact with the teachings that negation, the neti of good old Indian philosophy, is very much part of what he has to say. He starts with a denial. He looks at things like thought, intelligence, love, and he's denying, right? Denying in terms of, he says, you cannot only find out what is true if you deny what is false. We have made assumptions, and those assumptions, when you actually examine them, turned out to involve a contradiction. So the denial of that contradiction is the discovery, hopefully, that opens up the field, clears the deception, the illusion, so that truth can emerge. This is his bet. This is his proposal for all of us. But I want to go back again to the beginning and see how negation has been present all along. What is he denying? He's been denying from the beginning of this exploration. So we'll see, because he then has a total denial of the whole content of consciousness, psychologically speaking. It's a very radical form of denial that Krishnamurti is proposing as the very healing of the human predicament. So I find that very radical. So we have to see, even if we can begin to appreciate how extreme, and also the necessity, the logic, the sanity of such a proposal, because it could be completely off the cuff, out of the blue, some kind of mystical exaggeration, but maybe not. Maybe it's sane, and it comes out of a careful consideration of the actuality of our lives. So it develops naturally, unfolds necessarily from what we ourselves are aware of, right? That would be the sane way of going. The wise can go beyond reason, but they cannot deny reason. If they are unreasonable, then they are not wise. So I'm going to apply a little reason to at least test the grounds, and so that whatever he says has to hold. Right? Now, he started with his referring to his famous statement of 1929, when he said, so he says, the core of the Krishnamurti's teachings is contained in the statement he made in 1929, when he said, truth is a pathless land. So there you have first negation. There's no path to truth. It's so radical. I mean, I don't know if it's even more radical than the negation of what the content of thought is, that there is no path to truth. We all would like to have paths to everything, and here is something that has no path to it. So it could lead some people, it has led some people who are a bit slightly cynical, I think, to say, if there's no path, then, go home and take care of it, because you can't do anything. You can't do anything about it. Truth is unattainable. That's not what it means. It means something else. So we're going to see. Man cannot come to it. So he defines which ways we have had of reaching truth and denies them. Man cannot come to it through any organization. So organization is out, through any creed, out, through any dogma, priest or ritual. So the whole religious field, which has been one of the major approaches to truth that humanity has developed, in fact, the way to truth, the quintessential way to approach truth, in the spiritual sense, K means it. Because that's also the field in which K is working, right? He's not working in science. He's working in spirituality, if you like, in the religious field. So this is the truth he's talking about, not, what constitutes the nature of matter at the subatomic level. He's not concerned with that. He's concerned with humanity coming upon something that has a universal existence, nature of the creative source of all life itself. Truth as a creative source of existence itself. Something of a more fundamental, perhaps indescribable nature. So the religions as we have them are not ways to truth. This is his denial. He says also not through any philosophical knowledge or psychological technique. Those are also ways in which we have made approaches to truth. Right? Psychological technique, I'm not sure that we have developed that. Perhaps in religion also there's been meditation and all kinds of practices that have been considered as conducive to truth. Psychology, as we know it in the West, has not really been concerned with truth, I think. Perhaps the interpersonal, what do you call it? Psychology might be, there's been a movement that way towards a more religious approach. But initially, psychology was not at all inclined that way. It wanted just to solve psychological problems. Still, that's an important aspect, because a disordered mind cannot look for truth. So it is important to bring order to the mind, and psychology, that's what it's tried to do. So it would be a factor of developing a quality of order in the mind so it can perceive accurately. Besides, Jungian psychology and so on have tried to have appealed to a more spiritual dimension, the unconscious as containing some kind, the very, distillation of human experience, and an element of mysticism in itself, in the symbolism that underlies the very lower layers of consciousness. Like consciousness has already distilled kind of cosmic wisdom in itself. So there's been that assumption as well, which is very interesting, but which it has not gone very far, it would seem. So he's denying psychological technique. He's denying philosophical knowledge. Also, what do we have? He says we have one field, which is he has to find it through the mirror of relationship, through the understanding of the contents of his own mind, through observation and not through intellectual analysis or introspective dissection. He dismisses analysis, he dismisses introspective dissection, but in that negation he asserts also something that we must do, where truth is to be found. Truth is not unattainable, therefore, he's saying, but is not attainable through these means. What is attainable? How is it attainable? We have to look. It can be found through the mirror of relationship. Is truth in relationship? In a mirror? That's interesting. Through the understanding of the contents of his own mind. So it's like the approach to truth is not even looking for truth, but to discover what is the content of our own minds. His approach to truth has to do with understanding ourselves. He's not therefore very different from the aims of psychology or even philosophy in that regard, in that the instrument that's going to find truth has to be truthful. And if there is deception in the mind, then truth cannot be found. So the first step to truth, if there are steps, is to understand the consciousness that's supposedly going to discover truth. So it's to understand ourselves. This is a proposal that self-knowledge is fundamental if we're going to find truth. And the field in which we are exposed and can be perceived is the field of relationship. But that depends on observation. Not analysis, but observation. Maybe analysis also has its own part to play, right? But observation is primary. Do we see or don't we see? This was case emphasis right from the beginning, right? Are we able to learn the art of living? Which means the arts of observing, listening, learning. That perception is the key to any foundation of order in mankind and to any creative opening to that which is true. The truth for K, if you recall, was not a fixed thing. It was not like the truth of gravity. There is that dimension to his teachings as well. He says, where there is division, there must be conflict. This is a law. Now, this is how we understand truth, for example, in science. Physical law, right? So he says there are also psychological laws. So he's bringing that in. But the truth he's discussing, ultimately, he says, is not a fixed point. Is life itself. Is such a creative thing that it can't even be captured in time. And the movement of consciousness is time, because it is from the past, and therefore it can't even begin to approach truth. For truth to be perceived by this mind, the mind must be in a state of unknowing. Essentially comes down to this thing of what's the relationship between knowledge, thought, and truth. And whether they can meet. It's unclear, because if thought cannot meet with truth, then how will be always split? So there must be a connection, right? But can thought discover truth, or thought can be quiet enough so that it responds to intelligence, and intelligence is the only access to truth. And intelligence is not of thought, is not of time, is not of consciousness as we know it, but it's something which can be awakened precisely when thought is in order. It's a tremendous, complex suggestion for us to go into, right? So from there, he goes on to further denials. He's going now to look. This is what he did in this little 5 paragraphs, the previous 4 paragraphs, actually. He's going to look at what this consciousness is. What are the contents of our mind, which we have to understand? What are the contents of this mind? Right? And he says, man has built in himself images as a fence of security. Hello. Religious, political, personal. These manifest as symbols, ideas, beliefs. The burden of these images dominates man's thinking, his relationships, and his daily life. These images are the causes of our problems, for they divide man from man. His perception of life is shaped by the concepts already established in his mind. So here we have a first instance of the difficulty inbuilt in the nature of consciousness as being its content. Consciousness is its content. That's Krishnamurti's basic statement. But what is the content? And he said the content is these images. But if these images, we based our security upon them, then we create these barriers and divisions. This is what he suggests. And therefore, according to his own law, where there is division, psychologically speaking, there must be conflict. Where there is conflict, there is no security. So that the consciousness, as we have built it, is trapped, caught in a self-movement of self-contradiction. This we went into in greater detail in that chapter that we had together. But this is the implication. Therefore, what we have, you see, security is the positive. Security is what we all need. That is also true, huh? But the way we go about it is false. That's the interesting thing. There's no denying the truth that we need security. Food, clothes, shelter. Beyond that, we need right relationship, because only in right relationship will we have proper security, is in peace. So is in the way we are with each other, the values we have, whether we are arrogant, violent, aggressive, and so on, all those are necessary aspects of, well, keys to whether there is security or not. But these are the images. I am a Russian and you're an Ukrainian, or an American or a Mexican, or I don't know what. We are in Europe nowadays. We're nothing. We're all mixed up. Luckily, we're giving up on those strong identities, right? At least that is our project. Hard as it is, huh? The French particularly don't like to be anything else. So we're a bit troubled. And already the British said, we don't want to lose our identity. And we have an island to protect us. So they went back to their island. All right, good luck. We all said good luck. Whenever you want to come back, just tell us, So you see, not so easy to give up these identities, this sense of difference, this image that I am this and you are that, and to seek security within them. This is part of the problem. And that's something that Krishnamurti has been described extremely clearly and insightfully, and which after 60 years is not permeating our human consciousness very much, which is urgent because the dangers are increasing. And as we see, we still have war, which is part and parcel, is an outcome of this very process of seeking security in these images. And the image is itself the factor of division and conflict, which undermines security. We will not find security that way. And everybody who goes to war explains it in terms of security. You can see the total contradiction in that. So to negate this is fundamental, see? Negate in the sense of seeing the false again, no? Not just saying, out with nationalism. You can't just say it verbally, right? As long as we are interested in our own security, that's another issue. If we are, then we have to question our own approach to security. What price are we willing to pay for actual peace? And it may be as high as to deny our own identity. It comes from there. It's a very high price for most people. The other day, I was just taking a walk, just as an anecdote, taking a little walk, and I ran into a farmer who lives over there across the road, and he has his cows and so on. So he said, and he talked to me very friendly. I mean, he's one of the most friendly people around in the whole area. You have to talk to farmers. I suppose he recognized another farmer, which is where I come from, son of a farmer and a farmer. So he said, come and have a coffee with us. So I went to his house, and We started talking about where you come from. So I come from Spain, and they are Dutch very much, really people from the soil and all that. And I am very enthusiastic about the European Union. They were not enthusiastic about the European Union because he was taking the identity, the tradition, too many regulations coming from Brussels. They want to be independent and so on. And I felt that little tension for a little bit there. And I didn't pursue the matter. I'm having a coffee with some friendly people. But you can see instantly the image of, we are Dutch, you are Spanish, we are not, we have our own tradition, our own identity, and those values, that was a key word. The values are more important to us. We're about to lose those values. I don't know what values they were talking about, because the poor farmers are having a lot of problems anyway, even within their own country, right? But there are a lot of regulations coming from Brussels about, what do you call it, greenhouse gases, right? And the farmers are under a lot of pressure. They've actually caused quite a lot of disruption because they are being asked, to get rid of a lot of cattle and a lot of stuff, because those cattle produce a lot of, what is it? It's a particularly bad gas they produce. Methane. I mean, methane is very combustible, So and so on. So there are problems with them and with the government. They think that is Brussels. It's just the world. And they have a farm for meat cattle, and of course they offered me a big chunk of meat. I said, "Oh, I don't eat meat. Thanks very much." So you see, all the questions of how in our relationships, what we make our security on, this is their security. You can't go against security. And yet you have to consider the overall spectrum of what security implies. You have to abandon your identity. You may have to give up your farm. You may have to give up your meat industry. See, all of those things that come along and which undermine people's security. And people have to therefore pay a price. And are we willing to pay the price? And often it's very, very difficult because it touches upon something very fundamental and primal, security above all, right? The idea of the nation, its values, and then my property and the way I earn my living and all that kind of stuff. So look at it. The way of intelligence may undermine the established system of security, and it does, because it negates it. Intelligence negates all these images. The image of a nation, the image of religion, the image of a race, the image of what image does not deny. Every image that is standing in the way of human relationship, cooperation, and sharing, and also in the way of healing the planet from our own misguided approach to security. Look at it. It's really massive. If it goes right to the bottom of what we're doing in this world and what action is necessary for us to take. And the action is not only outward. You can see the primary action is psychological, is the denial of this content of consciousness, right? So you begin to see how the logic of the denial, the necessary negation of the content of consciousness, whether it's all or not, because Krishnamurti takes it there, all psychological content, but we see that these images, at least, that we have put together, we have built in ourselves, that's what he says, man has built in himself, for security are contrary to security. And therefore they need to be denied, negated, because they are false. They lead to a contradiction. They deny themselves, in fact, you see? So negation is not that one negates anything just out of the top of one's head, is that one perceives through the contradiction, which means that the thing that's being examined denies itself, right? Negates itself. These images negate themselves because they lead to the contrary results of what they are intended for. The image of security leads to insecurity, leads to conflict in our relationships. For example, you can see how that happens. He always brings it down to that, right? The problems in relationship. When we have images, that's the factor of division and conflict. Therefore, no relationship. So I say, love is not a memory, right? You're in love with your memories. of the other, but the other is not a memory. So you may have a problem with the other because they don't fit into your scheme anymore, or their image has changed, again, from the positive of the liking to the negative of dislike, but it's still within the image process. And the image itself, which was the basis of relationship, might have been, is now turning against itself. It's creating a division. It was always divisive, and now it's obvious, it's divisive. The image divides. There we are. Therefore, it denies itself. It denies that it's relationship. It denies that it's love. So the negation is inbuilt in the perception of contradiction. Now he says, his perception of life is shaped by the concepts already established in his mind. These are all these images. Now, this content, he says further, of consciousness is his entire existence. So what, wait a minute, that denying that therefore means denying our existence. Psychologically, of course, we're talking. Huh? The individual, there we go. We also have this notion of the individual as part and parcel of what consciousness is communicating to us. The individuality is the name. My name, your name, the form, particular shape of the body, and superficial culture that he, she, of course, acquires from tradition and environment. This is the self, the individual self, the uniqueness, and we think we are unique because of that, right? Everybody is unique. Why are we unique? Because the mixture of these factors is definitely different from the mixture of other factors from other people. My fingernails, you know, when I go to the United States, they require that I put my finger, what do you call it, fingerprint, right? So my fingerprints are in the FBI files. In case I commit any well, FBI or whatever, you know, CIA or they just border patrol. Now they always require that, right? And just in case I do something, and they then can catch me. That's all right. I'm really willing to behave myself. It's an invitation to behave myself. So I behave myself. But they have my fingerprints, and that's unique. So there is something unique to us, yes? At least the fingerprints. Fantastic. I discovered that, and now that's how you can chase the criminal down. Otherwise, if all the fingerprints were the same, we would have a more of a problem. Or the blood type, or whatever it is, right? The eye, the iris of the eye. We have something which will identify us as unique entities. So that is there, but is that unique? Or down below, we're all the same, in the same pattern. My private mixture is superficial. This is what he calls it. He says it's superficial culture and acquires from tradition and environment. It's not deep. The uniqueness of man. So he's saying this is not unique. Everybody is like that. Everybody has those same mixtures. They are different, but they're still superficial and, let's say, not unique in that regard. The uniqueness of man does not lie in the superficial, but in complete freedom from the content of his consciousness, which is common to all humanity. So there he goes again. I think that my uniqueness, this is a radical negation again of what constitutes the individual. He says explicitly that he's not an individual. He denies individuality. Now, that seems to take almost the ground from under one's feet, because what is the impulse in one's life, the one's meaning, but to be oneself and to sort of, how you say, reach one's own full potential as such an individual, right? What is if there is no individual? Psychologically again, right? There's individual physically, in the sense of separate entities, separate units rather, not entities even. The entity is the same. The concept of the self is the same for everybody. But what happens if there is no individual? And what is this uniqueness he's talking about then, right? Because the individual is a private mixture. So you can put me together, if you like, the me, that is me, this personality, out of all the background from which I come. And then the little reactions I had to it shaped me in a particular way. The way I approach money, the way I approach relationship, pleasure, desire, fear. Those were channels, there's structures that are common to mankind, but which were shaped in a particular way, which define me. Right? So I'm defined that way. And if I'm aware at all of what I am, then I say I am this way. Right? But he's saying, if that's unique, not unique. That's kind of an arbitrary little mixture that came from circumstances. I'm as the result of circumstances. The uniqueness has something to do with something deeper than that. I'm not sure. What is this uniqueness he's talking about? Because he places the uniqueness nowhere within the content of consciousness, but in freedom from it. That consciousness, therefore, itself is not unique because it's the past, because it's borrowed from tradition and circumstance. Therefore, not unique in the sense of original. What is original to us? What is original in myself? So in a way, uniqueness has to do with originality in the sense of something that is not, has never been, is not the result of influence, is not the result of circumstances and one's arbitrary bringing. This confines us. How do you put it? Yeah, it makes us all kind of accidental. You can call accident unique, but it's not in the original sense of original, right? Or something original, unique. Huh? I think he's appealing to that. This is the only way I have to, at the moment, to understand this. We can go into it further. The uniqueness of man does not lie in the superficial, but in complete freedom from the content of his consciousness. Because the content of consciousness is the content of humanity has put together there. And we had to look at it because we looked only at the content of consciousness as being these images. But maybe there is something deeper even to the content of consciousness. Because I talked about, it's not just I am a Catholic, I am a communist or a socialist or a Russian or a European or a Spaniard or a man or a woman or whatever labels we put on ourselves as defining. And then we believe in, and we invest our security in those things, not only physical security, but psychological security in terms of certainty, in terms of affirmation of myself and my values, right? As opposed to other people necessarily, right? But rather that there are deeper layers of conditioning, which are also common to mankind, which are structural, things like fear, things like aggression, loneliness. What Kate talks about, what is common, he says this consciousness is common to all humanity. When he talks about the common consciousness of humanity, what's he talk about? He talks about these things. Everybody is afraid. Everybody is looking for security and for love, of course. Everybody is lonely. Everybody suffers. Everybody experiences sorrow. Everybody has violence. So there is a kind of stream that is even lower or more fundamental than the culture we receive. But that's still the content of consciousness. So my feeling is that actually the uniqueness also is not just on the removal of the superficial layers of the superficial conditioning that one gets from the culture and the tradition and the environment, but this more universal inheritance of mankind, of the tradition of pleasure, fear, sorrow, pain, aggression, violence, loneliness, the whole stream of suffering, really, which is what it is, that has been inbuilt in consciousness. That itself is even a more fundamental content of consciousness. When Krishnamurti talked about the content of consciousness, he talked about pleasure, fear, and pain, for example, as fundamental. But those are all factors are brought about by thought. So is all thought as functioning in conditioning itself through its connection of abstract representations and emotional experience. So all that is to be emptied. The superficial me and the deeper collective stream of consciousness on which that me is built. So he says, if you are free from all that, Well, first of all, because you are humanity, you are the world, that's what that means. You are not an individual. You are everybody else. You're only an individual if you're aware that you're not divided from anybody else. But this is a common ground. Therefore, there's no separation between you and another at that fundamental level. He says that if you were even to understand that, already something different will come about. The negation of this difference brings a unity about, or awakens us to the fact of a unity. And he says that unity of your sensing that you are the rest of mankind is already a fundamental transformative factor, because it brings compassion about. So compassion is already there in this negation of division of the individual and the world. Now, he's talked about freedom. Freedom from the content. He says this is fundamental for us, the uniqueness, the wholeness of man. Sorry, today's a bit long, but freedom of man, it has to do with being free, complete freedom from the content of consciousness. But he says this freedom, what is it? So he starts again on a massive negation that we also have misunderstood freedom. Look at it. Humanity has been dealing with all these things anyway, but he feels that we have misunderstood. Krishnamurti is a negator of that which we seem to have misunderstood. The negation of the false to bring about what is true. This is his thing. So he does it with freedom too. Look at it. Freedom has been so fundamental for humanity, right? We pursued it in all kinds of ways, and we maintain it as a fundamental primary value in everything we do. My freedom, your freedom, freedom, great word, right? But he says freedom is not a reaction. Well, freedom is not choice. It is man's pretense that because he has choice, he's free. Freedom is pure observation without direction, without fear of punishment and reward. So he knows what freedom is, but it's a negative freedom, right? It's pure observation without direction. Do you have any observation without direction? Without fear of punishment and reward. So it's completely devoid of any of these conditioning factors. Reward and punishment are conditioning factors. Freedom is without motive. Wait a minute. Again, you see, he denies and leaves us there hanging in a space which we can hardly grasp. Right? Freedom is not at the end of the evolution of man. So no, we're not going to freedom, but in the first step of his existence. When you were a baby, you used to think that maybe when you were a baby, we were free, and afterwards we weren't. No, it just means, what is the first step of existence? Is this moment now, right? There's no other beginning of existence. So he brings it right to here and not in time. What that means, essentially, I feel, is that it's not in time, but is in the instant now. In observation, which is the instant now, again, one begins to discover the lack of freedom. Wait, we lost it. Freedom is found, however, in the choiceless awareness of our daily existence. So he says, this is where it's at. Freedom, which is choiceless awareness of our daily existence and activity in the moment to moment beginning and end of our existence, which is right here and now. There's no other time of existence. There's no other beginning. We have invested our being and achievement in time is only now where existence is. So he says, that's where we get to bring it. So there's an implicit denial of time as a factor of freedom. Right? Thought is time. So do you see, if he's denying time, he's going to deny thought as a factor of human freedom and wholeness. Thought is born of experience and knowledge, which are inseparable from time and the past. So that's his diagnosis, has always made that diagnosis. And that's important to understand, because that's part of the ground of his negation of thought. Okay? Our action is based on knowledge. Time is the psychological enemy of man. Wait, we went into that, of course, and we indicated why we might be saying that, because of time being a limitation on our being, and in fact, deviating from the wholeness of being which is now by projecting our being in time, therefore separating us from what is, right? Therefore from the truth. the truth is not later. The truth is always here and now, is changing, moving. Time, thought, being based in the past, is not able to capture it. So our very attempt to achieve our own being through time is condemned to its own is self-defeating, because being is not of time and time cannot capture it. Thought is still an important aspect of our lives because it's fundamental to our functioning in the material world, and we have to have good knowledge, and we have to have skill in thought, no question. But psychologically, in terms of investing our being in thought, there is a mistake. This is the implication I hear him saying. Thought cannot be the ground of being, because being is not of time, and thought is time. So forget about it. We have to negate thought in this field. Right? Our action is based on knowledge, so we're always a slave to the past. Thought is ever limited, and so we live in constant conflict and struggle. Again, he brings the whole contradiction of seeking security and peace and all that through thought, because he feels that it's an inherent limitation, which is the nature of the images. Thought functions with images. We already went through that. It's self-contradictory. There is no psychological evolution. Whoa. Major negation, because the hope of mankind has been that maybe you and I will not transform this time around, but other people will in the future. That was the great hope of karma and a reincarnation and all kinds of good things that we have thought about, that mankind can achieve in the future some perfection of sorts. But the psyche as such, because it's bound to the past, can only function within its frontiers. Time will always have a frontier, and it cannot really overcome itself. For that overcoming of time, it has to end. So there's no evolution. Evolution is change within the framework of limitation. Therefore, no evolution in the sense of what we expect from it, of a perfection in the future. When man becomes aware of the movement of his own thoughts, he will see the division between the thinker and the thought, the observer and the observed, the experience and the experiencer. He will discover that this division is an illusion. We had asked last time whether we really discover it, and that remains a big question for us, right? Him, in his way, in a very simple way, points us to how we can maybe find that out. First, already going back to the notion of images. See, what observes is the image. I am my images, and I am an image on top of that. So these all images. How I observe another has to do, if I observe with an image, which is the observer is the image. I observe with an image, then obviously that image may distort, usually does, what I see, makes me blind. It's very easy to see with a prejudice. A prejudice is a judgment, as the word indicates, made beforehand. So I think that Black people are all this, or Muslims are that, or Americans or Europeans or whatever it is. We have images of all sorts that have come through our culture, through our influences, our education, our own experiences. We have made conclusions, and then that's what looks. The moment I send something that looks like it fits into my image, boom, the image becomes the conclusion, and I don't see any further, right? But that happens also with simple recognitions in daily life, of the tree outside my door, or the neighbor across the road, or even of myself in the mirror. This recognition process is based on an image. So that image you can see is no longer seeing. So the observer is illusion in that regard, in that what he sees is not actual. It's just seeing whatever he projects. That's part of it. I haven't gone beyond that point of understanding the basic suggestion to us to begin to understand this whole issue of his, as to why he would say that the observer, the division observer observed is illusory. What is illusory is the observer, which is what creates the division. What's illusory is the image, in terms of it taking over perception and distorting it. It introduces falseness into perception. That's the whole point. That's why it has to be denied, because perception is where it's all at, is where our freedom lies, where our wholeness lies, is where our uniqueness lies. Because perception of what is happening now is necessarily original, because what's happening now has never been before. This is his call for us to be creative in that sense, to be at one with the creative unfolding of existence itself. You will discover that this division is illusion. Well, we hold that question mark. Then only is there pure observation. There you are, which is insight without any shadow of the past or of time. This timeless insight brings about a deep radical mutation in the mind. So there is, from the negation of the false, the emergence of another factor, which is this quality of insight. And that's actually what we need. So it's not totally negative, right? Because you can see light coming through the cracks, right? There's a crack in everything. What did good old Leonard Cohen sing? There's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in. So there's a crack here, potentially. See, this whole field of thought and consciousness has taken over so much that he hardly lets in any light. So we keep darkening our existence with the past. So this is what he's calling for in terms of negation. The total negation is the essence of the positive, total of this whole movement as becoming the ground of being and the ground of perception. To take it out of perception, when there is negation of all the things that thought has brought about psychologically, the self, the observer, and the identity, which is based upon experience and the past, only then there is love. Why would there be love? Maybe there is nothing. Maybe we're just indifferent to everything. Well, because it's the love, what is it? Is the feeling of no division whatsoever with anything or anyone. So all division, according to him, goes the moment the self goes, which is what this thought has put together. And in that love, there is compassion. We saw also part of the ground of compassion that comes through the non-division between one human being and another. You are the world and the world is you. And intelligence, because in perception, there is insight. There is the contact with the actuality of things. And that the insight is the action of intelligence. So I say the whole thing is pretty coherent according to how I read it. But then we know the question lies in our daily lives. And that's a big laboratory. So, right, I went a little long today, but it was trying to sort of bring it all together. That's why I took a little more time. So we can have any comments and questions and discussion.
Mm-hmm. You have covered so much ground that I don't know even how to begin really on this, but I know I have been thinking about, this question of the emptying of the content of consciousness, what that can really mean. Because of course we have to some extent, it almost seems like we have to have some certain image. You have to be recognition, you say, is the image, but you have to be able to recognize your child, your husband. You have to know in some sense who you are or what you've done. And so it's interesting to sort of think how all of that goes together. It's as if you have to have both somehow. I'm not sure how. And also the question of this uniqueness. What is the uniqueness that he is talking about? I don't know if we can go into that more.
But I think it would be a good thing to do. I'm also very curious as to what it means to have. First, yeah, Eva, do you want to say something?
Yes, Nora, hi. Yeah, I was, when I was listening to what you were saying about this, what I jotted down was the negation of consciousness of these images is the truth that allows for creation, for uniqueness. So if you, if you're in a situation and you don't, and you are in not, there's no time, you're having you're having a relationship, you're interacting with someone in that time, like in that moment where there is no bringing in what they did last week or how they reacted the last time you were with them. So when you have that interaction with them, it is unique and it's creative and it's not based on your past way of interacting.
But you see, you're saying something very beautiful. I mean, I'm now understanding something, I think, a little clearer from what you're saying. Go on, go on. Why should I interrupt you? Go on.
Yeah, no, that's really, and I think that is that freedom that he talks about is, it allows for freedom of expression, of not being encumbered by all this other. I don't know. I think he's changed my life in his concepts. I can't believe it. But I think that uniqueness really comes from the creation of action from just the moment.
Yeah, a space where the past is not present or is not the dominant factor.
No.
I was just, as I was listening to you, I was kind of picturing very simply, meeting my children, which is, of course, one of obvious relationship I have. And it's in relationship where we have to discover these things.
Yes.
So I'm bringing it in. So the fact that if I bring yesterday to bear on whatever relationship it is, right, then that moment certainly is not unique.
No, right. Because
it's already been. It may change, it may fluctuate, it will of course have other differences in it, right? And indeed, like Nora said, I still have to recognize my children, but the recognition goes only so far. The moment has never been. Is there a sense also of that uniqueness of the moment?
And you know what else I think that is that it allows for your child, like if we can move that the child has an opportunity to be unique in that moment as well.
Yes, it's not confined by the image I project upon him or her. Yeah. But we also discussed this fact that we are so confined in our own being by the images, because it's not just us projecting images in our own self-image, but it's the images of others, which also confine us in the relationship. The relationship is a play of images and the adjustment to images. And in a way, the dependence on the image, the adjustment to connect one person with another, is a readjustment of images. But the image itself is a denial of true freedom. That's interesting, no? That the creative factor is already, we're seeing why you would say that the creativity requires that we suspend the image or remove the image as a limiting factor in our relationship with each other and with ourselves. Because the image itself is not unique, it's already in the past. Ha! I think we're discovering something, at least for myself.
And yet, to have that moment with another person, we have to be free, we have to be empty of this consciousness that we've been carrying around forever. Like my first question was about, if we're only going to find this truth in relationship, then how do we find those relationships? Because like you and the farmer, it's going to turn into something in our consciousness
Yes.
that becomes the issue that we talk about and then divides us. But I've been studying the Bhagavad Gita, and the first thing that Krishna tells Arjuna he has to do is deny his identity. So it's the same lesson here. It just kept reminding me that, so he has to give up this idea that, you know, he is a member of this family and that he's a warrior and that, you know, these are his beloved teachers that he's going to have to kill on the battlefield. And he can't get his head around it, that he is really not this body of consciousness that is going to do all of this. He's actually not even just the observer of that, but as you were saying, the being behind it all, the one, you know, the truth of our being is, and that's my other question is, like, if we empty the contents of our consciousness, then you mentioned, okay, so insight comes in. But I mean, that's probably why we can't discuss a lot of this, because we're not discussing it from that place, right? We're trying to discuss it from the contents of our consciousness.
But yet, you know, in our own lives, there have been moments where we have real evidence. Actually, also, we cannot ignore it, right? The fact that in our lives, there have been those unique moments of insight. Now they're
I think that's what he means by the mutation of the mind, that when we have these insights, there is this mutation, and we never see that the same way again. We have that intelligence, we have that knowing.
Well, he's talking about a total insight also. I mean, we had certain insights in certain fields in relation to particular issues that arose in our lives, right? Maybe it was a question of aggression in one instance, or a question of fear in another, or what else? Yeah, things like this. I don't know. I'm just mentioning two that happened to me. But that is not quite, see, those are significant because they give us evidence that indeed the human mind, whatever that is, apart from consciousness that goes on routinely operating on the basis of self-centered thinking, is also part of our real potential. And that in fact, that's where we felt both the uniqueness and the truth of something that was false, right? So this is part of the beauty of this thing, that insight has that aspect. To see through the false establishes the truth. So actually it's not so abstract, because it has happened to us. Wait a minute, I'm saying something new, so I'm hesitant. But I think, because I had not looked at it that way necessarily, even though that's what is implicit in those moments of insight, is that one sees something which generally is an insight into something that was causing some problem. There's also an insight into that which is positive also, right? Into some real truth that has no negation in it, perhaps. But mostly what we encounter in our own conditioning is division, conflict with ourselves and with others. So the insight, what is showing, is the false factor that's bringing that division and conflict about. For example, in aggression, it may be just a memory of when one was a child and one was bullied, and one developed a reactive self-protective mechanism when one was being attacked. And that mechanism acts unconsciously later on. And one doesn't know how one gets into that problem. So one has a major contradiction with oneself. One does not want to be aggressive, but one is aggressive. So one struggles and struggles, and the conscious mind is not able to tackle it. I can try to deny and do all kinds of techniques to prevent my aggression, but it will not work, because it's a reflex system in my consciousness, and it will just operate automatically. So I have to have an insight in the sense of a direct perception of that unconscious content, which on seeing it, which is placed back in time, removes its operating blind movement because it places it where it belongs, in the past, and no longer active in the present. So that's freedom. That's freedom.
Here's an insight.
No.
Here's a new insight for me. I just looked up uniqueness, and I have never encountered the meaning of that word before until now, which is to make one or to unite. Now that's quite far afield from the kind of uniqueness where I'm just my little self and I'm different from everybody. This is a totally different take on uniqueness. It's amazing. I mean, that has maybe something to do with origins. You know, I have this predilection for looking up where these words come from, how these words even come into being. Anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Thank
Well,
you.
but you see, that throws further light into our discussion, as a matter of fact, because a lot of our confusion just comes from the words themselves, right? So to remove as much confusion from the word as possible is also helpful. If uniqueness has to do with unity, making something into one, then that also is very, very significant. That the content of consciousness is actually divisive, fragmentary, and uniqueness, therefore, does not lie within it, because it's not unified, it's not whole. Uniqueness, therefore, will lie in wholeness. Interesting. I mean, I will look it up again also later.
I have a question. Here. So when this uniqueness though, like, do you notice when the unique thought is coming in? Like, is there any way out of the dilemma of having to control one's speech all the time? I'm just throwing that in as a twisted question somewhat. But to me, it seems problematic because there's a flow of speech in the mind, or there's a flow of something in the mind, and then there's a noticing of new thought. And there's something happening in between, like someone's getting hurt, you know? I'm hurting myself, or the other person is being hurt. And I'm talking an actual relationship now. If you know what I mean. So something else is occurring where someone's getting hurt and not noticing that their feelings are getting hurt. That's my question in a strange kind of way. If you have feedback, great.
Well, I'm not sure I understood your question, though. That's part of my problem.
Okay, I went into an example. Here's why I went into an example. So let me erase my example. Do you notice when new thought is coming in when you're talking? Like, do you notice yourself rambling? There's one yap, 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 yada, 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 yada. I've said this 100 times before. Then all of a sudden something, oh, I have not said this for many, many years.
Yes.
So it's like someone is trolling my speech. Someone is following what I'm saying. Not necessarily what I'm being or doing or anything, but
yes,
that chattering mind is being followed by somebody. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Right. The mind keeps track of itself. It recognizes what it has said before. It's its function to recognize, one of its functions anyway. So it says, I've said that before. So it keeps track. The mind keeps track of itself. This is an interesting observation maybe for us to make, right? And to what extent does the mind keep track of itself? When it can make that distinction, as in the stream of thinking, it can say, this has been before, and this has not been before. Now,
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
Yes, and you can find that, otherwise, we couldn't say, I've learned something. I've discovered something. So there is that also that element of discovery, even as one is thinking, like we were talking now, and I was seeing something new, right? When I said all kinds of things, but actually when Eva was talking, for example, I was seeing something, another picture, another side of, I thought I was talking a little bit abstractly, and suddenly I sort of could see the concreteness of it. I could see the more relational what almost functional aspect of what seemed so abstract in my description, even to myself. So that's part of the learning process of this perception that thought has to engage with actuality, see how old it is, and that there is newness that comes from perception, even within the field of thought. Thought can perceive its own relevance or irrelevance. This was Kay's also a good question. Can thought be aware of itself? Now, I'm not sure he ever answered that question very clearly. I'm still waiting for a paragraph of his where he really says, very clearly, this is so. But this is what we're asking also. And we see that to some extent, at least this is what we're suggesting, and maybe we should pay some attention to it. Thought is able, or consciousness, let's put it a little vaguer, is aware of what is old and what is not old, right? If Krishnamurti says, for example, all thought is always old, because it's the response of memory. Yep, but then we never have a new thought, right? But there are moments of insight, which themselves are not thought, which give rise to a new thought. So there is new thought, but the newness of it comes from perception, which may not come from thought if thought is confined to memory. So there is a connection between thought and perception. That's what Kay suggests. You see, when Bohm used to question Kay about this whole thing of thought and truth, thought and reality, thought, actuality, and truth, right? This whole dynamic, Krishnamurti describing these three domains of existence practically. Reality as the field of thought, everything that can be talked about and thought about. The field of actuality, which is everything that is, and the field of truth, which Kay always put beyond the field of thought and made thought incapable of ever reaching it. Bohm used to say, wait a minute, if reality and truth are both actual, then they meet in actuality. There has to be a crossover point. But Krishnamurti was very hesitant, and yet he had to concede that what he was talking about is that there was no way from thought to truth, but there is a way from truth to thought.
Oh.
So that for me also released a certain amount of discomfort in terms of thought ever having anything to do with truth. It can, but only as it responds to intelligence. Haven't you ever had, I had once the odd experience, which I never had again, of really thinking truth. I cannot even begin to describe it. I just was leading a quiet life and was meditating and so on and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly one evening I was just sitting by myself and my thought was not my thought, it was thinking truth. This is possible, therefore, in certain states of mind, which have themselves a quality of perceptiveness, where thought responds to that.
Maybe we could try that now. Maybe in the form of this question I could put, which is the thought. Is in my case. I close my eyes and for a moment I can hear words in my head. I would call that a form of thought. There are also images. I have an image now. Just now I closed my eyes. I had a little image. So somewhere in my head, my brain, my head, this head here, when I'm quiet for a moment, now there's a thought, there's some word or two or a little image. It's actually happening right now. I have actually, when my eyes close, I see your face a little bit. Now I open my eyes. So that's something that's happening. Now my question is, there's this possibly sense in the head brain area where what that sensation or what that experience in the head, like you could feel if a fly landed on my forehead, I would know a fly is landing on my forehead. My nose is clogged, I know my nose, so I know a little bit about my head, but inside in my head, in my brain, to feel a little, sense a little bit of where this is, possibly, or not.
Are you talking about sensing one's thoughts, perceiving the movement of consciousness?
I am talking about what I've just been talking about, which is in my head right now, inside my skull, where my brain is supposed to be. It seems to be, if I close my eyes, or if I, even when they're open, I can sense a little bit that I have a head, and in this head is a brain. And I'm using words right now. I hear these words that I'm saying, I seem to come into my brain. I think I hear my own voice, and I think I'm hearing my voice. Is it just in my ears or in my brain? Or when I shut up for a minute, and then I hear, for a moment, I hear an inner voice. I'm hearing it. So where is this sense of it? It's rather delicate. It's not something I dwell on very often, but it's comparable in a way to sensing the rest of my body a little bit, my hands, my legs, my feet, my back, and all this. So I come up into my head through the neck. It's just a little excursion in searching for the truth, if you could say. That's my little outgushing.
I have a question.
Hmm.
Who said that? There's a way thought, there's no way from thought to truth, but there is a way from truth to thought. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Who said
Well, I hope I'm quoting them correctly.
that?
Well, you always would take secondary sources with a grain of salt.
I know, always.
No, but I'm just saying that the way I heard them talking, and it is a whole set of dialogues,
Mhm.
which is called the series of Truth and Actuality. Actually, that's one. It was a truncated. It hasn't been published as a whole, really. The whole set. It would have been worth publishing as a whole. This is something that we have been insisting with the foundation. Please publish the whole thing. But all right, they're still taking some time about it. They were published in 2 separate books. They fragmented the series. One is Truth and Actuality, and the other is called The Limits of Thought. So for those who are interested in looking up those things, by the way, you can always go to the YouTube channel of the foundations, and you would find their talks there, their discussions. Those were dialogues between Bohm and Kay in 1975. Those were called the series of Truth and Actuality. They were published in those 2 books, but you can find them, of course, the actual recordings. Yeah, so you can go there. So there is where they were discussing these things. They got pretty metaphysical as far as I was concerned. That was mostly due to Bohm, who was beginning to see that Kay did have domains of reality, if you want to call it, and that there were separations there in those worlds between truth and reality. They were not meeting anymore. So, hey, that's like a duality, a gap in the universe. That's, when we're looking for wholeness, that's not a tenable position to be in, or is very challenging. Let's put it this way. So he questioned Kay, as far as I'm aware, to the point of saying to him, look, yeah, we can understand that there will be no movement between the past. There was a gap, you see, in the past, between the past and the present, that cannot be bridged by thought as the product of that very past. But there is then an intelligence which operates and which thought can respond to. So it's a one-way traffic here. It's not from thought to truth, but it's from truth to thought through intelligence. That intelligence, thought can respond to intelligence. If there is an if there, the whole teachings in a way are premised on the notion that we can understand thought sufficiently, that it brings it to order and puts it in its place. It's out of place. This is what Kay is suggesting. Part of the problem is that it's moved into an area where it does not belong, which is the psychological area. And he tries to point to the, how you say, the danger of that whole movement by pointing to the outcomes, which is all this division and conflict in which we are engaged. But that requires an understanding of it, an insight into the very nature of thought. So you see, it's like, it's a tricky thing, because we have to be so close to thought, to its actuality, that insight is precipitated, so that there is then a freedom from thought. It won't come from thought itself. The thought might help in terms of reflection, but it will have to come from insight. When that happens, he says, then insight is the primary operating mode of consciousness, and thought can respond to it.
Nice.
This is, I mean, that saved a little bit of the wholeness of the universe for me, in that this possibility is there for us. And we have, when we had little insights, we know that that's how it works, that you have to bring yourself to a certain level of energy, of intensity in terms of dealing with an issue, so that you're no longer trying to work on it. You're so totally one with it, with the problem that you got, that there is no separation any longer. And curiously enough, that is what precipitates that unity, you see, with the issue itself, is what precipitates the energy of insight. See, so I don't know how else to put it. And that insight in turn then changes consciousness, can even remove whole operations of conditioning, which it does. And freedom from conditioning is what we're talking about. And that's what does it. This laser beam of intelligence, which is insight, which goes right to the issue, throws light on it, perceives unmistakably what is false and what is true, and therefore change comes about. But thought can then describe it. See, this is a description, and this is thought, but it has come from a perception, at least as far as I can tell.
This laser beam is an image.
Yes.
It's just,
So it's
Yes.
maybe worth mentioning that there's many people now, sort of observers of culture, or whatever you want to say, who are positing that we're starting to move into a post-truth world, where
Right.
anything you say is, can be just taken as truth, like Donald Trump and the denial of the election results, etc. All of these things, and that's, pointing to what you're talking about, because thought is starting to go even more wrong, because it's essentially saying that truth doesn't matter at all anymore. It's only what I say matters. And then we're going to be completely lost, because then the operation of intelligence on thought is totally severed, right? And that's very scary, and it's actually happening. It's unfolding as we speak. So it's,
isn't there a certain truth in the fact that we're all here? I see about 15, 14 people. I mean, it's a fact, isn't it? All these people, all of us together here. It's
Yes, this question is very relevant in our time. I think the degree of confusion regarding the relationship between thought and truth is just so massive. And I worry sometimes because there seems to be an implicit, how you say, that whatever thought can come up with, by the fact that it comes up with it, has a claim to truth. Therefore the most outlandish speculations just circulate, and everybody can say whatever they want about anything on the slightest probability. My God, we're creating massive confusion. The communication is becoming increasingly difficult because there seems to be no facts that can be relied upon. We have a
Don't you think maybe this is a time then when you see that there is this mass confusion and everyone has their own truth? The only truth you can really count on is what you can find within yourself.
Well,
Or don't we go evidence? Don't we go evidence-based as well in our thinking? Like, do we
Yes.
not search for evidence? All right.
yeah, we have to have evidence in the sense of, well, evidence, you know what evidence means? Evidence means what can be seen outside. That's the meaning of the word evidence. Videre, evidere, to see outside. So our society, our relationships, you see, that's why our relationship is the evidence. Because it's what can be seen outside. CK was also concerned with how do you make this objective? In the sense of what would you rely on to make something true? You see, Krishnamurti is dismissed by many because they say the truth he's talking about is purely subjective. It's only what he's looking at in his own mind. How would you ever verify it? And Krishnamurti doesn't believe in going and putting electrodes in monkey brains to determine whether the observer is the observed. That's not his point. He says you can see it in your daily life, but you have also the evidence, which is how we are with each other, how we relate, or rather fail to relate, and therefore what that points to in the structure of consciousness. The outer observation, if it's accurate, leads to an accuracy of observation of the inner world. So it won't be your truth and my truth. If it is your truth and my truth, we're still in the same old mode of arbitrariness.
Exactly.
We have a politician, yeah, exactly. So if we have a politician here in the Netherlands that says, you know, my opinions are true. What? And people follow this guy and they voted him into parliament. Where completely something is going wrong, significantly wrong. Opinions by nature are not true. They can be true if there is evidence enough to support them. But by the fact that somebody has opinion is no certification of truth whatsoever. So we're full of opinions, which we're passing for truth. And we don't even care to question those. We really have to go much further. And we have to look at what actually those opinions do, what actually our images do, what our thought is doing. It's all about thought. It's all about consciousness having created this dynamic from within itself, within the known, and how that in itself can therefore lend itself to massive confusion because there is already a gap inbuilt in it between what is and what was. See, that's the massive potential for self-deception, that the past will continuously impose itself upon what is happening. That's what's happening. If I'm conditioned, I don't know what's a what, as a right-winger or communist or whatever it is, you know, or capitalist, that's what I see and that's my reality and that's what I try to recreate in the world, right, with my actions. If I don't see them and I don't see how they are the past, and they're missing the actuality of the moment. The actuality of the moment will always be a step ahead of the me. The me is behind the actuality. It belongs in yesterday. This is massive in terms of an insight, to have an insight into that, to perceive how the past itself, the past may be relevant at certain levels, like we said, huh? So let's not dismiss it altogether, right? I have to know how to drive. I can't forget from one day to the next and have to take lessons again. It will be too expensive anyway. So we better keep some knowledge. But the knowledge of me as relating to the world and the preconception of the world that prevents me from seeing and therefore from actually relating, that's where the danger lies. It's a massive danger.
I think one thing is, you and me, for example, we have totally different opinions about what is happening in the world, 100%. And we know it, both of us. And still, we both of us have been listening to Krishnamurti for 50 years, basically. But what is going on in the world, we have no agreement upon at all. When the Dutch government now, for example, forcing 3,000 farmers to sell their land, and forcing them from their land, I bet that you think it has something to do with climate change or something like that. And for me, I'm sure absolutely not. It has nothing to do with that. And this is kind of, and I mean, it's yeah, okay, we are 15 people here and you can see it like that. We are 15 people and that's the truth, whatever. But things happenings in the world and information creates perception. And which kind of information you take in information that you somehow like or something. You think you have the truth somehow, but you actually don't. You just take in a lot of stuff, you know. And when you talk about this with EU and all this, it makes me very disturbed when you talk about these English people who want to live on their island, whatever, you know, like that. When they're fighting for the freedom from bureaucracy and oppression, according to me, you know, and it's complicated to just sit and listen to sort of a lot of sloppy opinions coming out like that. You know, for me, it's complicated.
Yes, but there you are.
It's important things that goes on, and we have, and it's incredible how different places we can come to. I mean, I can count up everything that's happened in the world, and you and me, we have not the same opinion about anything.
Yes. So how you see? But how shall we therefore, you and I, communicate?
Yeah, I think it's not possible in this form. I think we have to be together for some time in such case.
No,
we could take a small thing like these farmers, whatever. We could take a very small thing, but that will take days to talk about it. You know,
right. But see, this is also part of the question. You see, are you and I therefore really willing to, if that was an issue, that what you're presenting is the actuality, that I took a certain view of things. You have another view. And I am certainly willing to suspend my views if evidence is given for something else. So I'm not going to maintain my views and battle you about it. Not at all. Because I know the partiality of every view. Are you willing to do the same?
100%. I would say that I'm willing to do the same. But then is the question, am I really? You know, and are you really? It's easy to say these things, like it's easy to talk Krishnamurti theories. But it's easy also that it becomes like a positive thing that we talk about, and not this negative thinking that we want to come to. But but we create it like a whole theory, and we try to live according to this theory, and it's sort of a dangerous trap.
Yes, quite right. No, but look, the trap is the opinion. Would you agree? Your opinion and my opinion, they're both traps.
Absolute.
Therefore, in the negation of our opinion.
I'm not sure. I have a feeling that my opinion is much more based on reality, and yours are based on propaganda and sort of misinformation.
Yes. But there's a belief.
Yeah.
There's things that you have not considered and things I have not considered.
Yeah, it's a lot of things I don't know. I know exactly.
It's all the content of consciousness, right?
It's just the content of our consciousness. But you see, this is, I think, what Robert is saying is quite correct, that this is the normal state of consciousness. This is a normal state of divisiveness. And some people think, I have the information, you don't. You just have the propaganda. And the other says, you have propaganda, and I have. So you see, if we go that way, we will never come together. This is the point and challenge of dialogue. You see, and as you said, it will take more time. But the point of dialogue also is that you are aware of your opinions and of the implicit limitation of opinions, and that what matters is relationship. What matters is not your opinion or my opinion, but the truth behind all opinions. And what matters is that our opinion doesn't come in the way. See, that's something else. Therefore, there has to be, if not a negation, at least a suspension of the opinion, because it matters to me as a human being not to continuously create this antagonism that comes through these opinions. You can see that there's a lot of aggression implicit in opinions that take such extreme polarities.
Because for me, it's more than that. You know, your opinions are very, very dangerous because they lead to global dictatorships. They lead to no more freedom for man. They lead to sort of, it's very, very dangerous the way you're thinking. And I sort of want really to change the whole way you're thinking. It's sort of basically just wrong, you know, and therefore it's sort of it's a big.
All right, look, Robert,
there are other people. Rob hasn't spoken, David hasn't spoken, User hasn't spoken.
Right. I mean, we should go on for another hour. Look, we're not going to solve the problem today. You can see the issues are massive, even to get through this whole thing. What I tried to describe, of course, was a very general thing, right? And I mentioned particular issues in which I do have particular opinions, and those rubbed you the wrong way. Okay, I understand that. Hold your horses. I'm not your enemy, and you're not mine. We're friends across the water, thinking differently, and we have to question our thinking. That's the point. Yeah, so we agree on something. So I think that's the basis of a friendship across all these differences. It's the beauty of dialogue and the danger and challenge of dialogue, which is it has to face us with all, it faces us with all these fragmentations that we come up with. And if we value life, if we value relationship and truth, then we have to be willing to risk losing our opinions by facing each other, by talking peacefully with each other in spite of those opinions. That's a beautiful project, you see. Of course, we're not going to do it today. It's a project for life and for our daily lives and for all these contacts that have this nature, which is not just this world view, is daily life, personality, the whole spectrum.
You know, sometimes dialogue seems like a succession of monologues. Does anyone ever have that impression?
Sure, but you see, there's an art and it has to be learned. We're not good at it necessarily. It's an art.
Yeah, it is an art.
I don't know, somebody who didn't talk wants to talk, because I also don't want to be, this is the last session and everybody goes away frustrated. So
I'll be quiet.
No, it's all right. You can see there's so much more. I mean,
I'm sorry, but I have one more thought, which I'll say, and which is basically, this is where I find new thought becomes kind of a site of conflict in a relationship. You know, who had the new thought? You know, it's an unrecognizable thought. You know, the fact that consciousness is not original is comforting, and I can be in that comfort, you know, in my relationships as well, you know, but just having fun until someone loses an eye, and then we got to figure out what thought led us to this eye being lost. And therefore, I'm trying to get to the bottom of this particular pattern. Thank you very much. I have no more to say.
See, that's the big pattern. The big pattern is a pattern of conflict. So we also have to be able to see this in the broader spectrum, beyond you and me and you being anybody, right? That's the issue, broader issue, see? It's not abstract at all, because you can see that that's part of our reality, like Robert clearly explained and expressed. This is what we face in daily life. When you formulate an opinion, there's a counter opinion. And that becomes the factor of dismissal of each other. And further, it can get so big that people will be willing to cancel each other out, not just psychologically, but physically. So this is a massive issue. It's not a small thing. It requires a lot of investigation. Krishnamurti's teachings are in his attempt to make us aware of the full implications of the structure of this divisiveness and conflict, and to suggest that there are ways, they are rooted in us, in the very structure of consciousness, and that there is a way to bring that to an end. And isn't that our fundamental responsibility? So that's all. That's all. So it's up to us now to see what we can do when faced with the actuality of our lives, to perceive through our own, what are the factors that bring this conflict about? And it's usually the me that invests itself in thought, opinion, experience, and whatever else. And it doesn't matter what that opinion is. It's the conflict that matters and why we persist in it. Freedom, therefore, from this whole movement is what will restore the sanity of humanity. That's what we're saying. I don't think that's crazy or psychobabble. It's actuality. But it's difficult. It's difficult, not denying it. When we actually face with a conflict, with an issue of opinion and personalities, boy, the whole world seems to go on fire. Why is that? Why are we not simpler about it, humbler about it, acknowledge the fundamental vulnerability of our being, and therefore discover compassion? We don't have it. We have self-assertion. That's why the negation is important and not the assertion. All right.
Well, we have to bring our session to an end. We're already over time. I'd like to thank every one of you for participating, and especially Javier, of course, for these truly wonderful sessions that you've been willing to share with us. I feel they're very relevant to our time, and Krishnamurti's, they show how relevant Krishnamurti's teachings still are, and it's up to us then how to manifest them in our life.
Indeed. Yeah.
These
Well, thanks a
sessions
lot.
can only be a stimulus to do that on our own, in our own way.
Hopefully. Okay.
So thank you very much again, all of you.
Yeah.
Hopefully see you again another time. Stay tuned with other sessions.
Maybe couldn't we sometime have a follow-up with Javier, you know? I mean, if we never see him again, we won't be able to continue the conversation. I hope sometime we reconvene at some point.
Well, Javier, did you want to mention anything about that, how people could stay in contact with you?
Oh, I'm not sure. We organize this thing in this particular way. We might in future organize something else.
Well, you're offering, for example, you're offering a course also on
yeah, that also, yes. I don't know if you looked at when Ralph sent the invitation to the Zoom link to this meeting. He sent also a link to the newsletter. That I produce a monthly newsletter, and there is a link. When in the newsletter itself, there is a text at the back that explains, gives an indication of a course that I'm giving. So that would be something else, though. It's not like the continuity of this. It's a kind of study of Krishnamurti's teachings, kind of from beginning to end, a kind of overview.
But it's a way to stay in touch with you and perhaps even sign up for the newsletter, for example.
Yeah, sure. You can go to, it's for free. It's free, so you can go to the website and you can always write to me there at my email and so on.
So do you have a website that they can keep in mind?
Yes. Well, I don't know who you sent the invitation for the link to everybody who connected today.
Yes.
Had that connection. So right there is the link to the newsletter, and you can go to the website. And you can subscribe to the newsletter or write to me through the website and look at it. That's one way, yes. Because we have no plans to organize anything like this in the near future. This was quite a unique thing due to the COVID pandemic. So, all right, now, thanks a lot.
I certainly appreciate all that you've been willing to.
It was a challenge, of course, because this was Krishnamurti's essential stuff. And how do you even try to bring out what the old man spent 60 years talking about? I took it as a challenge, and it's been quite a beautiful learning experience for me. So I'm also grateful for this opportunity.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved it because there's stuff there in here that I'm hearing that I've never heard. I've never asked myself before after all these years of reading him. And I noticed that, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
So thank you again. Keep well.
Can I make
We've got to stop at some point.
I'm not going to.
Okay, go ahead. It's Philip, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, please, let's make it the last comment. Go ahead.
I don't really have a comment. I just want to ask if there's any possible way that I might be able to have a private session, perhaps with Javier. I'd be willing to pay for that or make some kind of contribution, if that is possible.
Sure, sure. Just contact me, write to me, and then we'll make an arrangement like that. Sure.
What email should I be utilizing?
I think that you got also the connection for today. In that email, there should be at the bottom. You see, you have a link to the newsletter.
Mm-hmm. Well, just follow the links and you'll
follow
get
the link to the newsletter. And in the newsletter at the end, there is it gives you my email address.
Okay.
Because it's very difficult for me to spell it out.
I'll send you a brief statement and see if it's something that you're interested in.
Okay.
Maybe just an hour. That might do it alone. But that's Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thanks very much, all of you. All the
Take
best.
care, you guys.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.
All the best. Happy holidays.
Yeah,
Happy New Year.
Merry
Yeah, for
Christmas.
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you very much.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.